I'm originally from Waco, and I went to UT Austin, got my bachelor's in design, and while I was attending UT Austin, I was completely having a fish out of water experience, and coming from a really small hometown, going into this like huge city where I'd never really experienced engaging with so many varieties of communities of people, but also just being exposed to whiteness on like such a larger scale was like a huge shock to me. And during my junior year of college, I enrolled in an advanced photography course, and I had initially wanted to write and photograph images that were about Black men and femininity, but then I realized there were too many nuances to communicate in a semester. So following that, I ended up broadening my scope just a little bit after doing some research and learning that in that fall, only 925 Black men had enrolled at the university, which is 1.7% of the student body at that time. So that really, that number, we knew the number was low, but we didn't know it was that low, and it got brought into real perspective when one of my peers said you could fit all of the Black men in Hogg Auditorium and still have seats left over. And that was really shocking to me because Hogg is where we would host different student events. It's where we host our orientation for incoming students. So to actually be able to see that in person really just like shocked me. So following that, I made a book called 1.7 where I interviewed 25 Black men about their experiences on campus. And following that, that became the catalyst for the Black Yearbook. And so the Black Yearbook is a more expansive version, more holistic, more encompassing of many more Black students. And so it includes over 200 essays and interviews, photographs from students that essentially aim to express, our experience and really try to help understand what we go through or went through on a day-to-day basis there.
Cool, and I think that's a really great setup for taking a look at this film, and that's actually why we wanted to work with Adrian on this project, is that he, for the Black Yearbook, this newest iteration, has been going around the country and talking to people and illuminating these experiences through the tools that he has, which is film. So if we can play this trailer.
Diversity and inclusion in this space has still got to be a thing. And everywhere I go, it's me and my husband and maybe 2 or 3 other Blacks out of thousands of people. There has to be a massive move towards educating and getting people in this space. And so we've got to really work hard to make sure that this just does not come another good old boys club. And that's the bottom line. And so, not that we don't love everyone, but we've got to do something to make sure that our next 157 years does not look like our last 157 years after Emancipation Proclamation.
Great. So you've heard a lot about Web3-a-thon and what we're trying to do with it, and part of that is providing resources that'll help sort of expand the imagination of the participants so that they're building things that are focused on people's needs in a hyper-local way. And so where I wanted to start off with is the way that this trailer opens with it, which is with a quote from Bell Hooks that's talking about the power of the image. Can you talk about, for those who don't know, maybe a little bit about the significance of Bell Hooks and why, for you, she's an inspiration to you as a director?
Yeah, Bell Hooks is a phenomenon, mother, and so many things for so many people. And I'm really grateful for authors like Bell Hooks that really paved the way for a lot of thinking around books like All About Love and a couple of her other works, Art and Visual Politics, and really just trying to understand what it means to be a Black image maker. And so I felt that it was important for me to include that quote in there because it really shapes, I guess, the way that I make images as well. And so that was like a really strong emphasis behind why I wanted to use it. And I think I'm also really grateful for her even existing because I think sometimes we tend to like walk ourselves into circles, essentially trying to think about things that people like bell hooks have already done the thinking for us about. They've done the scholarly work, they've done the writing. And so we don't need to unwrite, these really amazing people that have given us the tools to better understand ourselves and collective groups of people.
So whenever we were coming up with and conceiving of like Web3-a-thon and what the challenge areas are, we kind of said that we can't talk about generational wealth building, we can't talk about financial health without talking about Black Americans. And you've been going around the country to LA and Atlanta, New York, and now here in Austin, talking to various people. Who are some of the people that you've talked to so far for this film, and what are some of the like threads or themes that you've heard?
Yeah, I mean, I think all the people that I've talked to are incredible, like self-starters. James Andrews, Naja Roberts, Leona Carter, and a handful of others. I see y'all out in the crowd. And so I think the common theme that I've seen so far is really being able to carve out your own path and really being able to make something that is your own and not have that taken away from you. And I think going back to that quote of, images can take away, I think Black people in America for so long have had our image reduced down to a specific type of insignificance. And over time, as we have grown more agency in these spaces, we have collectively tried to add back to that image. And I find that difficult sometimes, because as much as we add to it, people take away from it as well. And so I think there are some things about Blackness that don't need to necessarily be globally understood or digestible for, mass audiences. I think there is value in community and centralized groups that allow us to have that space so we can hold that for ourselves.
Yeah.
Yeah.
This is actually something we were just talking about in the back, which is this notion, you'll probably hear topics at this conference about like decentralized identity and stuff like this. All these concepts which are really technologically related, but you were saying like, maybe there is something about my identity that I do want centralized.
Yeah.
So talking about these like, layer one foundations and thinking about like, who is this really for? Can you talk just a little bit about like why you have that impulse? Like why do I want my identity centralized, at least at that conceptual sort of layer?
Right. I mean, so much of the world wouldn't move without Black people. I was thinking earlier today, like if all the Black people in the world disappeared, labor instantly gone, So many industries would collapse because, without us, there is no movement in so many different economies. And I think there's also such a strong presence that we have online in terms of creating content, creating imagery, creating things that people digest essentially. And so that centralization is important because if we don't have that space where we can, protect ourselves so we're not being cut away from, it leaves us with nothing at the end of the day. And so I think it's important to be able to have that safe space where you can go to and you're being nurtured and you're being fed in a way that feels mutually beneficial.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So, we started working on this just about a month ago or so. You probably didn't imagine that you'd be sort of one of the sort of main Web3 blockchain conferences, and here you are. Can you talk a little bit about how you came into this project, and then sort of if you've had some journey, personal thoughts or journey after you've been talking to all these people?
Yeah, I mean, kind of going to school here and being here today, it feels so surreal almost. Even just like seeing all the changes that Austin has made in this like downtown area and everything. And I think as I've slowly been, understanding Austin's like new identity, it's been, forcing me to like reflect on, what was around me in this space and how that, had an impact on me as I kind of moved through the world. And also how that like shapes the way that I move through my life in New York or back home in Waco, and how I pass that information out to the world, to my friends, to family, to different people. And so in terms of, I guess, like how I kind of got brought into this, obviously, like we've known each other through, my schooling at UT Austin. But in terms of my process of trying to figure out, how I wanted to, I guess, tailor each film, I think there's something jovial and nice about not being so stuck to one specific visual direction. And so these films all encompass a variety of visuals that really aim to encompass the many that Blackness has. So I think that's like a really important piece of it.
So at the end of the month, like we said, we'll be releasing these series of films. Each one will sort of have a distinct treatment.
Yeah.
One thing that was kind of interesting to me is that like the space moves so fast, and when you're making this film, you've kind of gone in the other direction and using something that's kind of like old and outdated, like film. Mm-hmm. Can you talk about the significance of using that?
Yeah, I mean, film's great. It's ephemeral, and it's tangible. Like, you can't take that away. And I own that physical version of that, and I'll always own that physical version of that. And so, if I had defaulted to just digital, I can't touch that. I can't print that out and produce that so that I can be able to hold it in my hands. And so I think there's something special about being able to have that.
Yeah. So earlier we saw a stat that's like, we hear these stats like 1 in 4 Black Americans owns crypto, as compared to like 3 in 20 white Americans. Based on like the conversations that you've been having, we hear those stats, we don't really feel or like understand why. Have you heard anything in your interviews that sort of can help elucidate that?
Yeah, I think to, I guess, unravel it, I really have to talk about literacy. And there's so many different types, but literacy starts at home. And, if you don't have that, then it becomes like a huge shock to you when you first start to have to engage with something like financial literacy, which is why, in conversation with Naja Roberts, hearing her talk about teaching grade school kids, how to manage a bank account or how to set up a wallet, that's something that is going to be invaluable for them for the rest of their lives. So I think there's that, but the internet is also just like this huge vacuum. And so, with only so many people being online, I like urge people to, talk to your neighbors, essentially. It's the best thing you can do to really become understanding of people, their backgrounds, different things that they're doing and what's happening. But I guess it's also important to say that we don't need to see or know all of those things as well. I think some of those things are better reserved, kept within those spaces too. So yeah.
Yeah.